All right, welcome to lesson 2. This is going to be on the architecture of us making our RAG-based chatbot. So if you missed us for lesson 1, you should go over and watch it. It's free, so you have no excuse. It's free just like this one is. But I'm going to assume you know the impetus for why we're making the RAG-based chatbot now. And now we're going to go over some of the architecture. So we want to plan out and understand how exactly our chatbot's going to work before we get too deep into it. And so I have some notes here already, so I'm going to place down my notes, and then we're going to treat this just like a normal planning stage where we're going to think about it in general, off the cuff, to really understand how we want to do this, not just for our portfolio project, but also if we want to expand this later into something else. When we build a Streamlit app, by the way, I am using Obsidian Canvas to make this flowchart. You can use Miro, you can use pen and paper. It doesn't matter. The thing that I am using does not matter here. This is just what I'm used to using, so I'm using this. We have an app, and this is just how all Streamlit stuff works. And then we have the components. So while we haven't dived into the Streamlit architecture yet, I can kind of already guess just by using other systems that like, oh, this must be our main function, and then our components, it's going to be similar to React. We're going to have our sort of individual functions in here that are going to make up our app. So over in our components, we're going to have the document loader. We're going to have our vector store for vector database operations, and we'll cover that when we talk a little bit more about the vector database. Will either be, I'm not sure if it's going to be in this video, it might be in the video when we actually build the vector database. But essentially, you know, you thought yesterday, or I guess whenever you watched the last video, I explained a little bit about what a RAG-based agent is doing is it's going through our documents and it's retrieving specific information from our documents first, and it's citing our documents. The vector storage is how that's happening. So that's why we called the vector store, the vector database manipulation, the vector database operations. That's the sort of database in which the RAG agent is using to access our documents. And then there's the actual chatbot, which that's straightforward. That's just the front end of you ask a chatbot a question, aka a prompt, and then it gives you back an answer. So that one's a little bit more straightforward. From there, we have our data, which is the actual documents that we're feeding into this. So maybe I'll connect this to the document loader. We'll have our environment variables. Let me get everything out on the screen first, and then our dependencies. So our requirements.txt, which is going to work with anything, and we're making this in Python, obviously. We're making this in Streamlit, which is a Python-based product. So this is all the Streamlit stuff. I'm gonna put this in a group. Put a big red circle around it to signify that's all a group. And then so we have our data. So our data connects to our document loader. Well, let's keep it textual. Let's not add audio, even though we definitely could add podcasts and things like that. Let's just keep it as simple as we possibly can. Our dot environment is going to have our OpenAI connection, which, if I had to guess, is going to be used for the chatbot and the vector store primarily. Maybe even just the chatbot. I guess the requirements are used for kind of everything, right? So maybe we probably load in the requirements when we do the app. Let's think first. What do we want our RAG-based chatbot to be, right? But we kind of have to decide what features do we want out of this? What information do we want it to retrieve? And particularly, we want it to be something pretty niche, right? Because if it's a general, if we're feeding it apple pie recipes, to go off of the example that I used last time, if we're feeding it apple pie recipes, you know, most AI already know how to do that. So there's no real point in establishing that in our system. So let me think about how I want to do it. So I know right off the top of my head, I have a couple of finance/investing docs. And I've actually done something like this in Notebook LLM, which is essentially just an app where you can make your own RAG-based chatbot. But of course, we are trying to make a portfolio project. We can't just use Notebook LM. This gives us also a lot more customizability and flexibility over how we make our chatbot. But since I've already made something in Notebook LLM that uses these finance and investing documents on my end, and they're basically lists of, you know, to give you some examples of what I would be using here, I'm thinking of, they do, God, what are they called? Investing letters of quarterly reports, quant bloggers, so people who are in the investing space, who are in quant finance, usually kind of open source what they've been working on in terms of their investing algorithms and things like that. I have a document called the investing checklist. Trying to be vague about it because it's technically proprietary. I took it from something back when I was in college and I just kept it forever. So that's what my document's probably going to be. And I think I'm going to probably just keep it to this. For mine, I'm going to keep it pretty simple. You can try being a lot more aggressive with yours, but I like the investing formula because I feel like a lot of people would be interested in a chatbot that gives like investing advice, or more specifically, because we're talking about quant trading advice. Maybe we'll add a video as part of the course talking about how exactly I scraped this data. I want to stay with, I don't want to be adding in like EPUBs or PDFs just in case for any legal liability reasons. But anything that's public, so for example, we can get the Howard Marks letters. We could get the Warren Buffett letters. And for quant bloggers, there's a lot of them, but I'm gonna have to remember. I can't remember any off the top of my head. They are around. Important note about this: if you're doing a public on a portfolio website, you might want to convert this into self-serve, where the people on the website have to put in their OpenAI API key. And the reason for that is because, and just as a security issue, is let's say you put this publicly on a Streamlit app that anybody can access. There might be nefarious actors who come in and spam this chatbot to take up your AI context usage, or your API tokens, and charge you a bunch of money for it, right? That's just a security best practice. We don't usually, if we're putting it on something public and there's not some sort of authentication procedure, we usually don't want to put our key up at risk. We'd rather the users, the testers of our app, self-serve their own API key. And in that case, it's all just local. It stays local to them. Same thing, of course, if we were to use our app just locally, we wouldn't really have to worry about this. How I want to end off this last lesson, I guess I should say last free lesson before we move on to the paid lessons. Just a preliminary of what a production environment would look like. So the output of our Streamlit app will be a development app. It'll be a portfolio app. It will not be ready for production. So how do we set that up? Well, we'd probably want to deploy it to some place that's not Streamlit. We'd probably want to deploy it via, let's say, Netlify. That's my go-to, but there's so many different ways you can do it. You can do it on just straight cloud, AWS, GCP. There are so many deployment platforms. My go-to is Netlify because that's also another really easy place to put portfolio projects. And then once we deploy on Netlify, another thing we'll want to add is authentication. I usually stick with Firebase authentication. Like I said, this is a very quick, off-the-cuff. When we get to our final episode, or our final lesson where I'm actually talking about production next steps, I'm going to get into this in a lot more detail. Oh, and another step we'll probably need here, because of course Streamlit is working straight out of Python, but if we're deploying to a website, what we might need to do is we might need to convert to Flask as a web front end. When we convert our website to Flask, that's just for Python, that's the easiest way to get a website up. If we want to pay, because of course now we're using our own, in that case we have to use our own OpenAI API key. They really should. I keep wanting to call it Open API key. Can we mutually as a group decide that that's the shorthand? Like if I say Open API key, you just automatically know I'm talking about OpenAI API? Because that's just too many steps. So we want to make some sort of subscription service, turn into some sort of subscription service. We'll attach the Stripe part to that, and this would look a lot more, these steps would take us a lot more closer. Of course we would have to do a lot of security, a lot more on our data, market testing, etc., etc. That's all stuff for the later production lesson in this course, which of course if you are on Gumroad, you don't have to worry about that, or at least you're accessing these videos from Gumroad, then you don't have to worry about that. If you are on YouTube, I'd love to see you for lesson 3. If not, that's fine. There's still going to be lots more videos on different topics, whether they be about RAG, whether they be about AI in general, whether they be about making your own apps, either for portfolio projects or for other purposes. And like I said, if you want to just go through it and say, okay, well, this gives me enough of a lead to go on, I'll just take it on my own from here, you can also just do that. And if you're here on Gumroad, I will see you for lesson 3, where we get into the fine-tuned bits and pieces of our app. I'll see you then.